because we're just still continuing to feel out who's got the best relationships, who's providing us the best insights, and which one do we actually like working with, because these aren't just transactional things. Like, a transaction will happen, but it's really about the relationship that you have with the broker and how are you going to work with them in the future.
So now the capital markets brokers. This is a little bit of a different type of person and a different type of business, because we have debt and equity brokers. Many of them do both at the same time, and they're constantly being traded hands and debts being restructured. In our case, on the development side, the debt is a huge part of the drive of return, right? So I don't know if you want to explain how you worked with the capital markets brokers for your previous projects and just how to go about them, and maybe whether you don't want to sign an exclusive or whether an exclusive may be good.
Well, you'll read about in any headline for the last couple of years, interest rates matter, right? So interest rates are driving costs of projects up, and that has a ripple effect throughout the labor markets, through the purchase of materials, right? So how the interest rates are being handled at the national level is changing or has changed the world for everyone. And with real estate in particular, one of the main benefits of having real estate assets is the leverage that you can put on it, right? For the most part, for most people, it doesn't make sense for you to go into projects without having some component of leverage on it. The other big shift that's happening right now is the move away from the traditional banking system and more into the private capital and the debt funds. And so we've spent a lot of time talking with the debt providers and the debt funds and all the different private capital sources, because it makes more sense for a project or for projects like the ones that we're going after, where we have a smaller unit count, and the way that the pre-sales work and the restrictions that the traditional banks have, they require you to pre-sell so many of the units that it wouldn't make sense for you to move forward with that. And similar to the way that the brokerage world works on either the land or the retail side, you're going to end up having brokers who have a lot more relationships with more banks, and they can have more conversations than we're able to have with every single potential lender out there. And which way are the markets moving, and how is that going to play into our plan and strategy throughout the entire process? So in particular with development deals, when we're looking for a construction loan, we need to be talking to the brokers very early on and saying, okay, what are the spreads, right? So there's some indexed matrix or some index number that each one of the types of lenders is going to have a spread above that, right? That's basically their profit margin. So how are those spreads being determined, and who's being more competitive, offering a lower spread? Because for the most part, the index is going to be the same, and nobody has control over it except for the government. And so we don't have the ability to have a say. All that we can do is try to plan contingencies for if things go up dramatically, what types of terms and structures do we get into? And so we're really relying on the brokers to introduce us to however many different potential capital sources there are. And to your point about the exclusive versus non-exclusive basis of working with the brokers, for the most part, I don't want to get locked in very early on with an exclusive broker. And this also goes back to my earlier point about trying to gauge who's who, and are they trying to sell us on something? How hard are they pushing versus how open are they with the introductions and insights and knowledgeable over time? So for us, we haven't signed an exclusive agreement yet with any of the brokers, because we're just still continuing to feel out who's got the best relationships, who's providing us the best insights, and which one do we actually like working with, because these aren't just transactional things. Like a transaction will happen, but it's really about the relationship that you have with the broker and how are you going to work with them in the future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then there's many brokers that I've seen that market themselves as debt and equity brokers. But as we know, the past few years, most of the market has been filled with debt and little equity. So there is value in having real equity investors and being an equity broker, but it's sometimes just tough to even know if there's actual equity behind that sentence, right? If I could say I'm an equity broker because I know some potential retail investors.
Well,
right?
a lot of them are operating from like an unlicensed basis to when they're holding themselves out that way, and they're asking for fees that just can't be paid. Yeah. And so there are licensing and regulation issues that are not being the regulatory system is not enforcing enough of the rules right now as it relates to that. And so I think that that's just a problem right off the bat. And then in Florida, at least, you can do the debt brokering without having a bunch of licenses because it's sophisticated business people engaging in these loan terms. But yeah, there's a bunch of hidden issues in the regulatory environment with that too.
Yeah. So because you went to law school and you're a licensed attorney, I think we've talked about this, but we've seen, for example, as of recent, rates go up, kind of push up pref a little bit. There's a bunch of mezz debt, there's private debt, right? For the specific question mainly is, what's the difference between pref equity and a mezzanine loan? Because they kind of seem to blend, right? And generally, I understand in the pro forma like how it would work, but in terms of a legal document, is it kind of just the language that's used between the two? Like, what are we calling this?
So as you start to play with the terms of either one of them, you can make it look more equity-like or look more debt-like. And for the most part, the groups who are giving out these types of loans are going to identify themselves as one or the other, and their documents that they deliver off the bat are going to be in one side or the other. And it's really about the terminology that's used in the documents that's going to shift or move the needle one way or the other, whether it's debt or equity. And then what are your outcomes if in the event of a default of the agreement? And that's one of the biggest things with any of these guaranteed or promised, or I hesitate to say guaranteed or promised on the equity side, but with the debt, like you have definitive interest that's due, right?
Yeah.
And so in any event, you have a default mechanisms that are going to kick in, and whether you call it a loan or whether you call it equity, you're going to go down different routes of the actual like legal unfolding of that.
Yeah. And in most cases, or in all cases, the senior lender has full control in any case, right? In that.
No.
Okay.
I mean, when you say full control,
or I guess not full control, I guess
right, yeah.
Like default rights over the mezz and pref. No.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
So everything in commercial real estate has nuances to it, and everything in the legal documents in particular, there's going to be some level of who has the say in which types of scenarios. And so this is way off the topic of the brokers.
Yeah.
But you can get into the different situations where there's intercreditor agreements and step-in rights, and there's a whole bunch of things that you have to be careful of when you're working through like multi-layered structures of the capital stack.
Okay. So I guess to go back to the brokers, how have you seen capital markets brokers create value in explaining things? Like me asking the question about what is the difference between the pref and the mezz, I haven't seen a deal go down in terms of a capital markets broker walking through the different options for debt and equity, and not just the terms, but the actual language in the agreement.
Yeah, the actual language in the agreement, brokers for the most part are not going to ever touch. They maybe will work on the term sheet with you and help figure that out, or if you're stuck after you've already started down the path with a particular uh, capital provider, they might help make a phone call and try to work out whatever the issues are. But the brokers are not involved at that level of detail usually.
Yeah.
And the really good brokers are going to have insight into what those things are, and in particular with the term sheets and what feedback they've gotten from other people that they've placed the capital with. But you're going to have all kinds of different, it's really a range of brokers' understanding of whether they understand the depth of the deal or they're just making introductions. And at the non-institutional size, and going back to, big brokerage versus independents, the big brokerages are going to have the highly trained, lots of certificates and credentials, and they're going to have their Series 7 and 63 and all of these different registrations that are going to kind of signal to you that they know more about how to structure these types of deals. Ideally, you don't have to stack these different types of things onto your development deal in general, because that just adds complexity and risk.
Yeah.
So best case, you have your debt or equity broker helping you get something that's much more streamlined than that. But again, as you get into those larger institutional things, you really want to be working with a broker that has an understanding of what's available to get that full capital stack set up in the optimal way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then working through the different types of brokers, like kind of the largest deals that are traded are usually investment sales, and in some cases there's no broker involved, or an investment bank like You Still Secured that's helping with the trade of these $500 million assets throughout the country, which from my point of view is just based off of pure workforce. They have the capacity to push it through a bunch of different people, through a bunch of different analysts, and make sure that all the details are there, the numbers are buttoned up, and the transaction happens. But of course, we have smaller investment sales too. And then land sales could be investment sales. So there's so many different aspects to it. I know we could go on all day, but I don't know if there's any one last point you want to make to the viewer about just how to go about choosing the correct brokers in any scenario, because there's so many and there's so much nuance.
Yeah. So for me, again, it's kind of picking a specialty, right? So someone's going to have a specialty in land, right? How many land deals have they done? Who were the parties that they worked with on both sides of it, right? So if you are an individual investor who owns some property that is just a piece of land, are you going to hire a residential agent because that's all you know? Hopefully not, right? You want to work with a land broker, someone that has done it several times and knows how to talk of the developers and do the underwriting, right? If you're working with a retail leasing group, do they mostly do listings or do they mostly do tenant rep? Right? If you're working with an investment sales agent, are they someone who has done multifamily deals of that size, right? And how are they presenting themselves? The emails that go out, the broker blast, the MLS, the CoStar, all of the marketing stuff that they're going to pitch to you at the beginning is somewhat irrelevant. There's just a minimum quality threshold that I would look for. Do your due diligence on the broker and make them provide due diligence upfront for what your deal is and how they would pitch it. So that's really how you can start to gauge it. And like anything, shop around, right? Get a couple of them to do it for you and pick the one that you really click with.
Yeah, absolutely.